After the death of King Solomon, David's son, the nation of Israel was divided by civil war into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern nation of Judah. Both nations began an almost constant downhill slide, led by wicked kings, adopting pagan religious practices of the nations around them, and suffering the consequences of abandoning God and His loving care. The northern kingdom of Israel is the first to be destroyed by the Assyrians in 722 BC, followed by the defeat, captivity, and exile of Judah under the Babylonians in 586 BC. It's primarily during this period of several hundred years of unfaithfulness to God that we find most of the prophets. They were men and women through whom God spoke and acted, pointing out people's sin and disobedience, warning them of the consequences of their actions, and calling them back to God, who had brought them out of slavery in Egypt and had given them this promised land. Accounts of some of the prophets, like Elijah or Elisha, are found in the Old Testament historical books. But most of these men's lives and words are found in the Old Testament books that we call the prophets. Four longer or major prophetic books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, and the 12 shorter or minor prophets, all collected at the end of our Old Testament. Isaiah was one of these prophets. Though the book that bears his name is primarily the words of God for the Jewish people, the book tells us a little bit about Isaiah himself. Isaiah lived in the 8th century BC. Now, this is almost 300 years after the golden age of Kings David and Solomon. Isaiah lived in the southern nation of Judah, which had been led for 40 years by King Uzziah. It had been a time of relative peace and prosperity. But now, Uzziah had died, and everything seems to be coming apart. Judah has become subject to the rising power of Assyria. The future seems uncertain at best and terrifying at worst. God is helping His people through Isaiah to understand that their idolatrous, heathen religious practices and their culture of oppression of the poor and persecution of the weak, their bigotry and their legal system have all brought them to this point. The first 39 chapters of this long book deal with these issues. But everything changes when we reach chapter 40. Beginning in the last half of this book, it seems as if God is talking not just to Isaiah's contemporaries, but to those living generations in the future who will be suffering the consequences of Judah's abandoning God. These amazing chapters speak to a generation that will be taken into captivity and exile in Babylon, who will feel forsaken by a God whose love and power they would begin to question. God tells them of a king, Cyrus, whom God will use to restore them to their homeland. And He foretells the coming of their ultimate king, the Messiah, who will bring salvation as a suffering servant. Many people don't believe that God knows the future, or at least that He doesn't show it to people, even prophets like Isaiah. They would suggest that there was a second prophet who lived during the future exile and who is writing these chapters, which were later combined with Isaiah's writings. But I believe in a God who knows and controls the future. And however God inspired these chapters to be written, they contain a message of truth and hope, and a warning for 21st century Christians as well. It's these final chapters of Isaiah from which we'll be teaching during these 5 weeks prior to Easter. We'll be reading sections from Isaiah in our daily scriptures, a chapter each weekday for 28 days. So I hope you're ready to accept this challenge and to jump into Isaiah with us. I believe you'll be surprised at how meaningful and encouraging these chapters can be as God speaks to you through them. Throughout history, God has had a plan to redeem us, a plan to save us, and a plan that we desperately need.